Matthew 19, verse 1.
1,
Okay? Now when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, 'Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh'? So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" And he said to them, "Because of your hardness of hearts, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery." The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have been made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this, receive it." And we probably should stop there. All right. It's interesting. Anytime we start talking about the subject of divorce, tension, can come into the room here. Because we all have experienced, either directly or indirectly, divorce in some form or fashion. I know my parents divorced when I was fairly young, 16, 17 type of stuff. So I understand the impacts of that. And so we all have, situations in our lives that are that way. Let me just go ahead and get it out, Frank. I know you have a situation with your wife or your former wife, and like that. And I was thinking about this while I was going through this and praying, how I don't want it to be an awkward, subject, a difficult thing for any of us to talk about, but to rather to stay focused on what God's word is, and it is what it is in God's word here with it. So let's just get into it. So first of all, the first two, I actually thought I would just stop at verse 1, verse 2, and just stop right there. Because to me, it's a subject unto itself, and that verse 3 begins kind of this other subject here. So Jesus had finished these sayings, and then I guess we ought to ask, what are these sayings, right? So it's all about in 18, mostly about forgiveness, about dealing with people's sins that have sinned against you. The last story here was about the guy who had a whole bunch of money owed to the master, and the master said, pay me what you owe, but he couldn't because, what was it? It was like it was like $2 billion he'd have to pay back in today's money because the talent was 20 years worth of labor or wage. And so there's no way but yet the guy then went to someone who owed him money after he was greatly forgiven. Went to someone who owed just maybe $17. Yeah, something like that, and wanted to give me my money or else, that kind of thing. And it wasn't for the purpose of helping to pay off his other debt, right? Yeah. On it. So and so the lesson there was about understanding how great God has forgiven us of our debt, that which we could never, ever, ever repay. So therefore, we ought to be in that mindset of forgiving others, was what the last in 18 was. So we get to 19, and that's where, in context, is now when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and large crowds followed him and healed them there. So just to put a little bit more context into this, in the commentaries that I was browsing through, what I find interesting, all of them stop and take a moment on this to talk about that this he is on his way to Jerusalem, to his crucifixion. And that many of the commentators state that he knew this is where he was headed. This is his destiny.
He knew that no matter what, but,
Yeah. I'm not doubting commentators because, I mean, they studied more than I, but on the surface of just Matthew, I don't see that saying that.
Right.
But I could jump down to the end and see what happened, and I'm sure nothing surprises, this is not like, oops, I didn't know I shouldn't have gone to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Darn, bad choice. So all the commentaries, which I find interesting, do say that. And so if that is true, then the last part of verse 2, or in verse 2 here, and he healed them there. It's one of these, if you've got a big event that's going to happen, something significant, something you dread that you're going to have to do, and you know about it for days. I don't know about you guys, but my attitude is to be away from people. If it's such a big, huge thing, I don't want more people around me. I want less people around me. I'd rather just, I got to deal with this. Let me deal with this. I'm not,
Or the people that are helping you deal with that specific
right,
thing.
right, exactly. I just kind of want to close in. But in here we see that that's not what it was. He stopped to heal people, which I find amazing. Just remarkable that he would do that.
Well, I totally agree with you 100%, but then I think there's also cases where you're ready for the event, and there's nothing else you can do, which doesn't happen very often. But there's occasions where you're done. It's just a matter of, I hate to use the word killing time. I don't want to be that trivial with it, but you don't have anything left to do. You've done all your checklists. You've got everything done. You've got everything ready. You don't need to prepare for a speech, like if it's not a speech or something. Right. So you're literally just killing time.
Right.
I'm not saying this is the case, but I think in his case, talking about those two verses specifically, he knew what was going on. I mean, obviously, he's omnipotent. And I'm not going to say it was just another day, I'm not trying to trivialize it, but it was just, he knew it.
He had things he needed to still get done.
Yeah, and whether or not he was overly generous, I'm trying to put our type of feeling into him, which is impossible, and just like, I'm magnanimous, I just want to make sure I get as many people healed as I can, or if he's just going about his business, so to speak.
Yeah.
And on the way, he saw me dealt with it.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, I don't know, but it could be any of the above is possible.
Right.
Yeah, I think he was continuing to fulfill the prophecy of the Messiah. Because the prophecy of the Messiah said he would heal them all. All that would come to him, all the sick that would come to him, he would heal them all. And so that's what he was continuing to do, is to fulfill that role as a prophet. That all who would come to him that were sick, he would be healed. So I think that's what's going on here.
Prophecies did say that that's what Messiah would do, and that's why he said at one point, well, if you don't want to just look at what I'm doing,
Right.
that should be telling you I'm fulfilling. I'm the one you should be looking for.
Right.
Yeah. And then we see the Pharisees in 3.
Yeah,
where,
and then the transition to the Pharisees. Yeah, so why would the Pharisees be there in the first place?
The big crowds.
Big crowds.
Big crowds.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that to me, that's what ties that in. It's like, speaking of the large crowds, the Pharisees, we're here. Yeah, because I just have that kind of thought there. That
Kind of like a politician.
Yeah. Is it going to be a lot of people? Okay, I'll be there.
Yeah.
We were joking about politicians in their prayer meetings and stuff like that. It's
exactly.
kind of the.
Exactly.
It's funny that we think politicians and we think Pharisees in the same breath here. It's kind of
You would think that with the Pharisees following and seeing all the healings and all, that they would put it together. You'd think that they're the ones that study the scriptures and stuff. You would think they would say.
I would think verse 8 answers that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing with the Pharisees, I'm not convinced that they didn't know he was Messiah.
Interesting.
Was
You
it
know,
again?
I'm not convinced that they didn't know he was Messiah.
Interesting.
And yet they chose the power in their position over the recognition of him being Messiah.
Well, I mean, not trying to get into local politics or today's society, but that's exactly what's happening right now.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have people, I'm not gonna get into left, right, or anything, that are so convinced that their way is right and everybody else is wrong,
Mhm.
that they're totally ignoring obvious things.
Yeah, common sense.
Common sense,
Yeah.
facts.
Right.
They just make it up themselves. Now, whether they're faking it and just saying it that way to make a point, or if they, I think a lot of them truly believe it.
Right. They get
Yeah.
delusional.
It's, how's that phrase is, my perception is my reality.
Right.
Perception is their reality, right?
And so they make up the rules and that's their reality. There's nothing you can do to change it, no matter what.
Right.
And I think that in a way, the Pharisees are kind of like this.
Yeah. And I think that's why Jesus dealt with them so harshly, is that, they knew they were, in some cases they were blind guides, but some cases they were, they were leading the people right into the pit.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think, by the way, in verse 3, the Bible was written wrong here. I think. they
Oh,
used-
wait.
Yeah.
What time is it?
And that is, it says, and the Pharisees came up to him
So there it
and
goes.
tested him. I think that should be, and tried to trick him. Instead of the word tested.
Well, that's the
Try
way I
to
read
trip
it. I
them up.
read it as a tricking testing.
Yeah. And to me, this isn't a test to say, okay, Jesus, let's see if you've got the right doctrine. Okay, Jesus, let's make sure that we're in line and that we are understanding you and testing you of your worth and your messiahship here.
But that's what happened every day. The Pharisee, the people, the commoners, would turn to the Pharisees and look for a thumb up or thumb down on everything.
Yeah, yeah,
And so the Pharisees were going, hang on, guys. He's got the thumbs up and the thumbs down.
Right.
I'm proverbially, but that's just the
Yeah.
way I visualize it.
Yeah.
And so the masses were looking to the Pharisees to give a ruling.
right.
And so they're doing their due diligence. I'm not trying to.
It could
defend
be
them.
that. I do think some of that is their due diligence, but I also think that early on we see in the scriptures that from a certain point forward they said, and we have to do to get rid of this man.
Oh, well, there's no doubt about that.
Oh, yeah.
But they had this
Not
power
wrong,
thing,
yeah.
and that they saw Jesus as a
Threat.
disruptor or whatever you want to
Right.
call it, and to their power.
Right.
Mhm.
To their power. Right.
And I don't know if they physically went into the deal. Maybe a couple of them did, but I don't think they generally said, "We're going to cut the Messiah off the knees, so to speak, to keep our power because we like what we got." I don't think they necessarily thought that. I think that they were so leaning in their perception of what Jesus is going to be, that when he came from low life and not riding the right horse and yada yada, and then this guy can't be, he's just an imposter, and we just got to find a way to
Mhm.
shut him down.
Right.
So I think they really honestly, in their hearts, believed it right, but they just were so far off base.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure I'm going to be so gracious to them.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, he'd say you can listen to what they say because they were saying a lot of the right stuff, but their practices were totally off.
Right. That's true.
That's
and
what
there's no doubt that we're power hungry. I'm
Yeah.
not arguing that. I think even in here, it talks about an occasional Pharisee that went to Jesus and did the right thing, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So there's a spectrum.
There's always a spectrum, and that's a very important point to make is that every group has a spectrum of it within a group
Right.
of people.
some
Yeah.
believe, some don't believe.
Yeah. So we're getting to this test, and they start off with, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? It's just like people who want to trip you up to find one of those hot button issues. And we have it today as well. People will try to find an issue, I don't know what the issues of today are. There's so many
Well, I mean,
to pick from.
there's abortion, there could be
Yeah.
gun, something to do with gun, depending on how they ask the questions.
Right.
All of that. Healthcare,
Yeah, exactly.
immigration, there's different ways.
Whatever
to
is
ask
the hot
question.
button. In my last run, immigration was one of the hot buttons there about, just depends on how they felt. And anyway, so a hot button issue was divorce, and there were two camps, as I understand it, from two major religious leaders, as I was reading some of the commentaries, that mentioned that, and I forget the guy's name, so I couldn't quote their names, but one who had said that that Moses had directed that you need to divorce the wife for any reason. If she didn't look nice, she didn't look great, you need to divorce her. And there was this camp that didn't qualify it. They said, yes, you have to have it. As a matter of fact, down here it says there was a commandment. It implied there was a command. Deuteronomy 24 is where they get that from. And then there was this other group that said, no, only on sexual immorality. That was it. That was your only reason was that. And so they were trying to find him and fit him into that camp. Are you pro-life or not?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you anti-gun or not? Whatever. They were trying to put him into a camp of one of those religious leaders. Is what I think they were trying to do here, so that they could be more infighting and chaos here. Which I find interesting, his answer.
Yeah.
He doesn't go, and which is really cool, because it was my tendency, if someone asked me, which camp are you in, I would answer what camp I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
With
But
a
that's-
little bit of defense, yeah.
That's not what he did. He didn't start talking about, well, I believe this guy or this Pharisees or which camp he followed in. He starts going back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's really cool, is that he says, have you not read that he who created from the beginning, that is the
You can go any further back than that.
right. His whole point is, well, Pharisees, what did God plan?
Right.
Not what did the law say, but what did God plan? What was the setup before
Right.
that? Its purpose, which I really think is really kind of cool. It's a great way to argue, if I can call it that. You go back to, well, I believe that it should be this because President somebody said such and such. No, you go back to the beginning
Right.
and get back to the core issue. I think. Of
Yeah,
it.
I think the core issue, because when Jesus would address a lot of the rabbinical laws and everything of that time, he would, his thing was always, he would say, "You have heard it said."
Right.
Right. In other words, this is the way that you've been taught. This is what the Pharisees have taught you. This is what the way that they have interpreted the law.
Mm-hmm.
And he does the same thing here, except for the fact that they ask him the question
Right.
before he can make that statement, right? So just like he does before, he blows right past the two camps,
Right.
and says, let's not even talk about the camp. Let's talk about what was there before the two camps decided that there were going to be only two ways
Yeah.
to do this.
Yeah.
Let's strip away all of the other crud and let's see how it was in the beginning.
And the thing is the two camps were made, if you will, by men. And by going back to the beginning, you're getting before men perverted it or forced a division.
Yeah.
They also are coming to this like they don't really care that much about what the law says in this, because they're trying to trap him,
Right.
to get him to mess up while they can get rid of him still.
Right.
And you get two camps that usually are opposed to each other, but they both want to get rid of him, so they're teaming up to get rid of him.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
All right.
Matthew 19.
Okay, good.
In verse 4.
Yep.
About where we're at here. Okay. All right, so now that we've raised that question, Steve, what do you think about it?
Very good. Very interesting.
So we get to this other phrase that it feels so timely of today, and that is, he created them male and female.
Yeah.
No other options. And by the way, the institution of marriage was created by God, not created by man. I mean, that's what he's trying to say here is, this is not man's law that created this union, and therefore man can make the rules about what is and what is not right. But rather, this is something that God created, and he created specifically for one man and one female. if you have a problem with homosexual marriages and stuff, me not supporting that, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go to God's Word to argue about it, because I didn't set it up. It's not an institution of the Christian church.
Right.
It's not an institution of any institution that man is involved in. The marriage is God's institution. And this is, I think, this is where we stand our ground. We don't have to say, you know, you need to have the state authorized man for male and female. It's not our business. This is God's business. And it's his institution. We should keep our mitts off of it, is personally what I think. Okay, I've off my sandbox. My soapbox there. So he says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, and so he's basically describing the old
Genesis chapter 2.
Yeah. And then he starts talking about this flesh, one flesh, two flesh, or whatever. Yeah. What do you think he's meaning by that?
Well, I read that because they're talking about divorce. So with that context, when you merge something into one, you can't cut it in half anymore. When you weld something, it becomes one solid piece of metal. You don't undo a weld. You might cut part of the weld, but you're also cutting
Right.
the metal.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you fuse something into one, it's one. It's not something glued together just standing next to each other. That's the way I've always read that one. And I think that's the implication he has here. It's one.
Yeah, and
Period.
the leaving father and mother, you know, the bond of the marriage ends up taking precedent over.
Oh, the
It
family, yeah.
doesn't become unimportant in the family, but this takes precedent.
Right.
As far as
Right. It starts a whole new family.
Yeah.
Right. Is right there. You don't start a family in our traditional ways when you have children. That's not what starts a
No.
family. The family starts at the husband and wife when they get married. Oftentimes, as a side note here, why marriages have such difficulty when the children leave is because the children
Yes.
were treated as that's what made the family,
Yes.
was, and they became
Yeah.
kid-centric
It's a common
family,
problem.
right? And that causes lots of problems here. So
It's
kind of a side
common
note there of that.
Yeah.
So he says in 6, so what therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So he answers them by saying, don't do this. So the Pharisees, that's the they, when they say they said to him, Pharisees said to him, why did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce? See the flaw in that question? The actual flaw?
Yeah, he didn't command it.
He didn't
allowed
command it.
It was a
Yeah.
concession.
It was a concession, exactly. On it, if we looked at Deuteronomy 24 verses 1 through 4, that whole thing says if a man finds a woman not presentable or whatever, or doesn't like what's happening, and at the end of verse 4 he talks about then it's okay for you to issue a divorce or letter of divorce here, so that she can remarry again.
Right.
It was protection for
It was
her.
protection for the woman.
For the
Yes.
woman on that.
Yeah.
That was nowhere in that was a command. And if you read it, it wasn't command, but they turned it
Turned
into
it into it.
a command.
So this is false news, false media, the way they ask the
Yeah,
question.
how they twist that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, you stopped beating your wife today, right? You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
that kind of,
Fake news.
yeah.
Fake
right.
news, that's the way I'm looking
Right,
at it.
exactly. So that right off the top, that question or the counter argument is a false argument. But he answers this one directly. This one he doesn't get right to the core of the issue, which I always find Jesus does. Don't attack the edges of the issue. Go straight to the core.
Yeah.
And it is because Frank, this is why I said in verse 8, he said to them, because your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. It's their hardness. It's a hardness of man.
Yeah.
It's our flaws that divorce is there. It is not God's flaw. It wasn't the institution that was flawed. God didn't make a mistake and say, oh gosh, now that I've instituted this, what are we going to do about divorce? There was no option for that. but from the beginning, there's that from the beginning, it was so. Which I find interesting. You see that in verse 4. From the beginning made them female, male and female. In the verse 8, but from the beginning it was not so. If you go down to, where was it? Says it again somewhere. Can't find it, but it was another one. Anyways, always going back to the foundation, back to the core principles, I guess was what I was trying to highlight there. All right, and then he comes and says, whoever divorces his wife except sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And it's the disciples' counter that I find interesting. In 10, the disciples said to him, well, woo, Jesus, based on that, sounds like you're saying it's better not to ever get married at all.
Because our experience is.
Yeah, whoa, what is going on here? And what is Jesus' response? Yeah, I think if you're ready to hear this, yes, that's what it is. If you're ready to commit your life to God, wholly and completely, yeah, you free yourself up with a lot with not being married.
Yes.
You do.
Yep.
And
there's some physical things you can do to make sure you're not married.
yeah.
Which is even the next step.
Yeah, which is what he describes here as these eunuchs here, being whether physically castrated or not physically, or if you will, self-castrated by not the physical, but just the decision.
I guess it could be. I think it is self-physical, but it may be mentally.
Yeah, it's.
I think the last one talks about that.
Yeah. It says, and they're eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. Didn't necessarily mean it was a physical self.
Okay, fair enough.
Castration. It could have been either way
Yeah.
For that. And no, you should not base a religion based on that last phrase there.
No,
You should be
it
at least.
probably has been.
I don't.
Well,
think
there
we
definitely
should
has
do.
been groups that.
Yeah, I'm sure there have been.
They
but
get high out.
To me, and to the last point is that if let the one who is able to receive this receive it.
Yeah.
And it's talking about really about the gift of singleness.
Yeah.
About you don't have to be married. There's no commandment that says you have to be married.
Right.
And I think that's something we ought to help people understand.
Yeah.
Our culture, we kind of imply, oh, you got to be married or you're not,
You're not a
you're not
whole
complete,
person.
you're not a whole
Yeah.
person, and that kind of stuff. Where there's some very noble things
Right.
About that. Things you can do without being and I will call them burdens, but I don't mean burdens as in, gosh, I wish it didn't happen. But there are a lot of responsibilities. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for, of being a married person. And the focus that you have to put on that. There is that, so as opposed to focus on kindergarten. All right, we need to stop here. What are you guys praying for?